AI. All right. Good evening. My name's Tara Youngborg, and I'm the manager for the Stamp Gallery at the University of Maryland. And I am so thrilled to have you all here tonight for our artist talks for Amidst, which is our midpoint second year exhibition of MFA candidates for the Department of Art at the University of Maryland. We host it every year. It's always an incredible exhibition, and I'm thrilled to be able to work with our colleagues in the art department to bring this on. So you'll all hear from our three artists in this exhibition: Martin Gonzalez, Alyssa Imes, and Elizabeth Catt. And each of them will give a short presentation on their work, followed by about 10 minutes for Q&A as well. And also, I do want to say, even though our artist talk is virtual, the exhibition is open in person at the Stamp Gallery, so in the Stamp Student Union, and we have hours Monday through Saturday. And if you go to our website, stamp.umd.edu/gallery, you can get more information about the exhibition and also details on our hours, when Elizabeth is performing in the gallery, and plenty more. So I'm going to turn it over to Justin Strom, who is the Associate Professor of Printmaking and Digital Imaging, as well as the Graduate Director of the Arts Department here at the University of Maryland. He is going to introduce our three artists tonight.
Right, thank you, Tara. Thank you, artists. And thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. I want to first introduce Martin Gonzalez. Martin grew up in the Dallas, Texas area, received his BFA from the University of Minnesota. Martin's work holds personal and communal stories, embodied memories, and an urgency for healing. He is inspired by the interplay between personal narrative and those of communities he is part of, examining the tension of belonging and not. The effects of colonialism, white supremacy, and a culture of domination on brown bodies are recurring sites of entrenchment where he begins his investigations. Thank you, Martin. Take it away.
Awesome. And then for the slides, Tara, I think you addressed that. I just want to double check. Am I doing it or are you all doing it?
I can run them for you, unless you'd rather.
Cool, thank you. No, please do. Please take it away.
All right.
Hey, everybody. Well, I am Martin Gonzalez, like Justin said, and I'm going to talk to you about my work in the Stamp Gallery right now. So right here, what we're looking at, I'm going to show you kind of how my ideating process works. I'm an interdisciplinary artist, and I work in sculpture, video, performance. I started off as a painter, but I don't really do that anymore, but maybe one day. So this is a page out of my sketchbook, and it's an illustration of a dog tethered to a doghouse. And I've been kind of playing around with this idea of the dog as a not perfect, but a metaphor for the human experience. The way that you treat a dog is kind of who that dog becomes. And I really like that, this idea of tethering and leashes. Yeah, if you have a family dog and the dog is loved, I think the dog is a loving dog. I think if the dog is neglected, the dog at its core is still a loving dog, but with if a dog's neglected or abused, it tends to take on that kind of energy. Yeah, and I think that it's like they're mirrors to us, they're our best friends, I think is what they're referred to, or how we refer to them. But at their core, they're really just loving creatures. And I think we are too. And I think that in referring to the human experience, it can get really mired when we use the human form. So I've been really jamming on just using the dog. Yeah, I even, well, you won't be able to see it, but I have some stuff here that's not that pertinent. And then so we move on to the doghouse, right? So the doghouse as a symbol. Sorry, Tara, can we go back? Sorry. Yeah, so the doghouse as it's like kind of a symbol, right? It's this place of belonging. It's a shelter. It's a thing we use for outdoor dogs. And I think that I get the impression that there's indoor dog people and then there's outdoor dog people based on this kind of thinking of who the dog is in relationship to a family. I grew up with my dog being kept outside. And I think I kind of always felt like that, oh man, you know, he's hanging out by the door. He wants to come in. But I didn't set the rules and just kind of thinking about how that affected that dog and who that dog became. And yeah, and trying to understand that relationship now, even though he's passed away. And it was a really impactful moment in my life when my dog passed away, Coco. We took him to go get euthanized. And I just kind of reflected, we got him when I was 4 and we put him down when I was 15. And I remember we were at the veterinarians and it was like an emotional moment. I was there with my dad. My mom was there also. And I was holding my dog's paw right before they implemented the euthanizing medicine. And I'm not sure what it's called. And it was a dimly lit room and there wasn't much lights. And I was holding his paw and I closed my eyes and I looked down and then I saw this surging, blinding, like white light just shoot past my vision. It was just, everything turned white. Like I was staring at the sun, but like a very large sun. And then I opened my eyes and he had passed away. And so that was just a really formative experience. I think, like knowing that this dog, you know, that there was sentience in a way beyond it being like a pet or and I think that we are kind of in love with ourselves as humans, but really like this idea that like there's wisdom in all animals. Oh, I didn't start my timer. So yeah, so from that though, just like the dog as metaphor, this idea of shelter, I kind of think about that in relationship to how I grew up. I grew up in a white neighborhood as like one of the few people of color in that neighborhood, you know, middle class, so financial privilege. But what I think is interesting about that is that there are narratives that we inherit, right? Like we all inherit like a narrative of who and how we're supposed to be in the world. And I kind of like to think of that as shelter, as place. So for example, like the dog's place, shelter, identity is this dilapidated, really kind of just put together with just scrap material location, and it provides shelter for the dog. And I think people are still coming in. I see people in the waiting room. And so, yeah, so this idea of shelter and identity, I think that we're constantly reinventing ourselves. Like, who am I? Am I this script I've inherited, and then pushing back against that? And we're all trying to find place in the world. And I think something that's really unique about, you know, my experience and just being Chicanx in general, Mexican American, is like you're a border person, and you're never of your nation, but you're never of this place. And you are, but you're not. And so this place of belonging is like a theme in my work. And in this bottom image, you can kind of see there's a picture of a long-haired gentleman, much like myself, learning about the Alamo. And there's this worm that's whispering, shh, and it's this chain, this linkage. And so I kind of think about this link that's connecting this dog to this house, this doghouse is it's a collection of stories of experiences. And this one, I think, was a really salient one in Texas. We have Texas history, where they essentially teach you that Mexicans are inferior to the Texas people who start Texas. There was like one story in particular where there were like 12 white settlers like defended a land and they chased off 300 Mexican soldiers, which is like okay. We got to know when to lie and how much to lie when we tell stories. But anyway, nonetheless. Okay, Tara, I'm ready for the next slide. Thank you. And then so this is basically kind of, I was talking about how I'm an interdisciplinary artist, and the way that I work is kind of like this loose narrative that happens. And I like to draw and see where stories go, and it informs like sculpture and video. And I'll be getting to that point towards the end of these slides. So this dog is basically imagining its life happy, right? So we see this dog with these like sight lines, seeing this dog with a wagging tail, but then that mirage kind of vanishes, and this dog's like set in the desert. This bottom image on the left, there's a dog staring out a window and looking at a cactus. And I was raised Catholic. I think a lot of, Mexican Americans are raised with Catholicism. And there's this story of the burning bush where Moses is in the desert wandering. And God comes to Moses in the form of a bush on fire and speaks wisdom to him. And that's kind of just like a trait in the Abrahamic religions where people go to the desert to find God, which I think is, it's like a really salient like image. It's like, what is the desert? It's a place where there's not life, or where there is life, but it's rough. There's no water. It's not a place to sustain us. It's where we go to struggle. And I think that there's something really beautiful in that notion that these like three religions, and I'm sure there's more, that God manifests in this place of struggle. So there's a saying, for like people of like Mexican nationality, ethnicity, background, there's like, I forget exactly what it is in Spanish because I don't speak Spanish, but there's this phrase that's, you have the face of a cactus, which just means like, you look so Mexican. I think it's Caro de Nopales. And if you know Spanish, maybe you know what I'm talking about, you can put in the chat. And then so the cactus is just like a really big symbol of like Mexican identity. Like, for example, Mexico's flag, like there's a cactus there. And so in this image, this vignette, this dog is kind of like Moses in the sense of this symbol that represents Mexican identity is speaking wisdom of survival. Like there is a way to survive here. And if you listen, and that kind of points to other ways of knowing and learning, right? The image on the right, it's a little pixelated for me. I'm not sure if it is for you all. I'm gonna take a little sip though. I've got a bit of a dry mouth. And then the image on the right, there's a drawing I did of my dad. I kind of went over it a few different times, so it's a little messy. And then I really like this image of the cloud, the clouds in the chain, like a chain made up of clouds of sky, that you can be anchored to something and tethered to something that has no materiality. And I kind of think about that as like narrative, right? Like, what are the stories that we're reinforcing? What are the things that are holding us back? These invisible places that we can't touch that hold us back. And we see this dog on the right at the bottom is attached to a shelter with steel chain, and then these cloud chains, just kind of reflecting that it's like the things that attach us to our narratives and identity of self is through body and our acts, and then through mind with our thoughts. And these things kind of reoccur in our looping. And then can you go to the next slide, please? And then here on the image on the right, there's this dog head kind of coming through this plane, but like I was saying of body, of tangibility and intangibility. The images on the right above and below correspond to one another. So this idea of looping, of being stuck physically, of place. And then the image on the right is like, it's a room made of 4 smaller rooms, and you're changing, but you're still stuck in that place. And just kind of this cycling that happens. And I think that's a big, these are just symbols, right? I wouldn't say that my work is about dogs. My work isn't about narrative. It's really, I think, what I'm doing as an artist, or really what I'm just doing as a human, is just doing things the way that I listen to my heart. And I think that can be hard, right? I think that, when you think about heart in relationship to desert, you're looking for that burning cactus, if you will. And I think it can be difficult. But we show up and we're still here. So yeah, let's go to the next image. So I was kind of playing around with this idea of making a little miniature doghouse. And this is kind of modeled after the one I had been drawing in my sketchbook. It's fairly small. It's like, I think that this is about 10 inches by 10 inches by something or other. But yeah, I'm worried I might be developing arthritis. So I'm kind of like wanting to go away from materials. Like I'm a skilled builder when it comes to wood or metal. I'm pretty like confident in my abilities as a fabricator. And I think for a while, the big part of me was like, how well is the thing made? But as I develop in my practice, for me, that's not so much what my emphasis is anymore. And I kind of like learning new material. There's this idea of beginner's mind. So I saw this video of someone working with polystyrene foam where they were just carving like butter. And I was like, let me give that a try. That looks so fun. And I feel like I'm a visual thinker. Oh yeah, one more thing, Tara, can we go back one slide? I didn't touch on this point, but it'll come up in the last slide. And I'm paying attention to the time. That my sketchbook is kind of this like psychic space, or this space, if you will, that there's not really gravity and things are kind of upended and floating. And I think that is how I process the world, is these things are constantly ebbing and flowing in and out of one another. And I think we all have that capacity. I think some people are fortunate to be grounded and more so logical and have things have physics and gravity and exist in a clear space. I think that other people, and I tend to find myself in that camp where it's like things are ebbing and flowing in and out of themselves. And yeah, you got a foot in both worlds, if you will. But I think I'm in the right place as an artist. Yeah, to be doing that. Okay, sorry. And then can you go forward 2 slides? Yeah, and then so I was like, all right, well, let me scale this up. Let me make it a little bit bigger. And I was like, I want to make these pieces of wood look more organic. And I use this thing called a hot knife, which allows you to get really smooth curves and really intricate detailing. So the image on the left was the backside of that doghouse, which was my original idea, which originated from the sketchbook. But then the piece of wood on the right was really exciting to me. And I was like, whoa, let's see where this goes. And then can we go forward in this slide, please? This kind of steps back into the place of journal. And I didn't provide any images of it, but on the right, you can see an image of me in a dog mask costume and this chain suit that I made. But yeah, just kind of thinking about chain and bondage and linking ourselves to the past, and how do we break from these things that are invisible. So the chain on the left is like, I use symbols of an airplane, a kitchen knife, and a home from the neighborhood I grew up in, to kind of just reference things from my own past. And I think it's for me, my concern, and this might sound ignorant, but I'm so, for me as a maker or creator, as a human being who happens to be an artist or whatever, it's for me, I'm the space where I'm making and these revelations are coming to myself are the things that I'm most excited about. And I tend to, the viewer tends to be like a second or a third consideration about being able to penetrate the ideas in my work or know what I'm saying. So there's stories that are in that image on the left that I think are illegible to other people. And then can we go forward a slide, please? Yeah, this is kind of more of the same thing, narrative. This is my backyard sketch. This is kind of how I think about things. It's like these symbols and images are popping in and out in narrative, and just thinking about how the body speaks these stories. So I have a pair of lips coming from a chest of this silhouetted person. Yeah, and that kind of ties in loosely, and but we should keep going because of time. Yeah, so then I was like, well, hey, let's see what's up with these pieces of wood. So I upped the scale. These are about 5 feet, 4 feet in height and length, about 2 inches thick and about 1 foot in width. And this is in the same carving procedure done with a hot knife. And I painted them blue. And I'm going to go to a faster clip so we can go to the end images. Can we move forward, please? Yeah, and then so I was like, well, what can I make? I had these boulders from last year, and I was like, let me throw them into the mix. But I didn't really feel like these flat surfaces, really honored the material well. And I was trying to do something and emulate something from my book that I was like, well, let me just have fun. Can we move forward, please? And then I was like, oh, you know, things are kind of hobbled together and they're just kind of stacked together. And this was the first rendition of it on a smaller scale. And then can we go to the next slide? Here's another version of it. I was really excited about these. These aren't covered. It's the whole thing's really light too. So it's, I think if you're a sculptor, it's kind of, I think one of the banes of our existences is like lugging material and install and requiring help. And I think all of this together weighs about 5 or 10 pounds total. And it's about, I want to say it's about like 8 or 9 feet, maybe, cubically, roughly. And then can we go to the next slide? And then this is the final product for the install. I just posted it on Instagram, but referencing Instagram. But yeah, so that's the thing. It's like, it's kind of awkward. I'm not satisfied with my photography of the thing yet. And I think I'm trying to figure out the pictures for it. But just to talk about this work in particular with the 50 seconds I've left, even though I know I started my timer. Tara, you also feel free to interrupt me. The structure is really, you know, it's like kind of, I think where I'm at in my life, you know, it's like I'm doing the best I can, you know, with what I have, and it's not much. I think that there's like a playfulness to it because I think that that's probably how I move through the world, is like a playful attitude first. 6-minute buffer, what's up? So there's this, okay, that's good to know. And so, yeah, with this work, I think like this idea of like finding place, you know, I've kind of like realized, or something I've not realized, which means like, you know, terminal state, but something that is being revealed to me, is that I make space for myself. And whether that's through, well, that's my little fun timer noise, roller music, I think is the name of that alarm. So yeah, I make space, you know, for myself. I think creating space is something I'm interested in. And I kind of loosely touched on this idea of belonging. I think oftentimes being like, you know, a chubby kind of awkward Mexican kid in a white space. I think like this idea of belonging and never really feel belonging. And I think, you know, my relationship with other like Chicanos and Mexicanos, I think that there's always kind of a distrust there. It's not really, even when it feels like you're with your people or your home, I think my personal experience, it's like, well, my relatives think, you know, I'm soft because I grew up around white people and spoiled, you know. I wasn't in a gang, you know. And so there's this constant, there's this place of not belonging, but then, you know, also navigating like, well, I exist in white spaces because of privilege and access that I've had, that some of my family hasn't. And so, you know, whether that's through making helmets or masks or wearables or tents, or other sculptures that you can go inside of yeah, I think space. Yeah, I've said that a few times, but shelter also, and just doing the best you can. I think this is like a collapsed structure. And yeah, I feel like my time the last couple of years has been really difficult and has highlighted some things that I can work on as a human, beyond being, you know, an artist. I think, you know, it's like, how do you make your life stand up in the way that you respect, you know? And I honestly don't, you know, it's just difficult knowing how to do that on your own. I think, you know, I feel kind of isolated being here. And, you know, I think that that's kind of cool because you kind of see how you are like in the world and what you can do for yourself. And granted, I'm in the institution. It's not like I'm, you know, not without a safety net, but yeah. So hobbling together the best that you can and just celebrating the total wreck that life is. I think things are in a constant state of collapse. Nothing's perfect, nothing's ever done. And just kind of leaning into that. And I think that that's really who I am. I don't, you know, I'm not, yeah, I'm not a finished product, and I really struggle to present in a way that I think is respected by, you know, the world around me. And you just got to lean into who you are, you know, and yeah, I think that that'll do it for me. I guess there's a couple more images. Yeah. Let's go through them. That's one with a little, I put too much heat on that filter, so it looks a little warm, like we're at a campfire. Feel the toastiness, put your hands up, feel that warmth. And then there you go, Will. And then the next image is a different installation of the same body of work. But that's the thing, it's like, I got to build it every time. So yes, indeed. But if we're gonna go to questions with a final image, can we go to that previous third one? I'm an open book. You can ask me anything. You can ask me about my coffee.
Thank you, Martin. And so folks, I just wrote this in the chat. If you have questions, this is a small group. So if you would like to unmute and ask your question, please feel free, or you can put it in the chat and I'll read it out loud. While everyone's thinking, Martin, could you tell me about the letter forms on your installation here?
Yeah. So that is still a thing that is in the process of being revealed to me. The letter forms I used in a video piece last year where I hold them on fishing line and against a green screen. So they're three-dimensional objects that shimmer. But with this installation piece, I was kind of like, let me just bring all my toys into this space and just like play. Like, I just really want to play with my toys. And I think that the cool part of it, I didn't provide any images from the other perspectives or the interior because I haven't figured out the lighting yet. But throughout the piece, the letters are legible at different perspectives, right? So you can kind of see through this central window right above the M by the yellow flag, and there's a backwards S. And I think because that letters tend to have a legibility based on orientation, it kind of is an invitation to walk around the space. And also just with language in general, I feel like language is of this space of like thought, of psychic space, of concept, of things tucking in and out of one another, billowing into themselves and swallowing their own tails. So, you know, I feel like these objects, if they exist in that space also, yeah, so I think that that's just kind of a reference to that.
Thank you, Martin. And let's see, Lenora raised their hand, so hopefully it's giving them unmute.
Hey,
What's up, dude?
It's so good to hear about your work. Thanks for sharing and thanks for your practice. I was curious to hear more. I was struck by the way that you talked about like the physical act of like having to construct this every time, and also kind of your continued reference to space, and wondering if you could talk more about what it means to construct and make in this kind of institutional space. And I know we've talked about like what it means to navigate UMD as an institution, and yeah, just kind of curious about shelter making or like making this in the context of kind of the institution of Maryland, predominantly white institution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, great question, Lenore. Thank you. Well, to break that down, there's a few parts there. It's like the act of making this, and then the act of making this in this space, and then the act of making this in this space, and what is like investigated in that, and what kind of things have I learned from that. So I'll go step by that. Yeah, the act of making this every time is so tedious, dude. It's like the first time I built it, I didn't have resin epoxy on any of the objects. So there was a lot of texture and friction. And for those of you who don't know, resin epoxy is like plastic glass when it hardens. So everything's very slick. When I made this time, like the gallery floor is very well kept. I'm sorry, I think I put a scratch in there. That everything was so slick, so it kept on slipping. And I think that the act of just making and things collapsing is really just like, damn, like that's how I feel about my life. I'm like, I keep trying. I just feel like, you know, it's just like, you know, I've been thinking a little bit about like, I think how I feel like the art world wants swans and I feel like I'm a duck. And I think that there's room for all animals in it, but just thinking about, you know, it's like, what creature am I? And I'm, you know, I'm like kind of like rough, kind of, I think I can be abrasive, but, you know, in this idea of making this and hodgepodging it together, it's like just a lot of disappointment. And you can't see it. This thing collapsed maybe 5 or 6 different times in the space. And, you know, this final iteration, I think, took about 8 or 10 hours to finally get a structure that held. But it's a learning process. We're always learning. You can't give up. Then making it in this space, yeah, you know, it's you know, because I know you're more up on that conversation than I think the audience. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that part of being a person of color in the first place is like thinking about race in relationship to whiteness and not knowing. I think one of the most insidious things about race relations and just, you know, this dynamic of like people with different experiences is that it's always a factor. And I think that there's a trope of like, you know, like I think oftentimes people of color, you're like worried to mention that, I think in predominantly white spaces. But it's always a factor, you know what I mean? And I've kind of come to the terms with like, you know, my language is I haven't cussed yet. I said damn once, but I was not as colorful with my language this time because I've been working on that, you know, because presentation of self in certain spaces is a thing that's crucial for survival. But at the end of the day, this is who I am. I'm a loud out there person in your face. I take up a lot of room. I think that growing up, people wanted me to tuck myself into myself and be small in a certain space. And it's like, you know what, dude, I'm not that person. I'm loud and proud and I'm not going to be afraid of that. And I think that means and that's the thing where it's like, I think in a certain perspective in institutions, I think it gets read a certain way. And I think that institutions have like this cultural backing of what it means to behave and to present and to be, you know, a certain way. And it's like, but if you're coming from a space that, you know, it's like, there's a first part of undoing the learning that you've done to just like know that you matter and that like, oh, wait, maybe I was targeted for being a bad person my whole life because of this brown thing. It's like, well, how much of that was that? How much of that was a feedback loop? But then at the end of the day, it's like, dude, you just got to be loud and proud and rowdy, like wrong and strong. Like, I'm tired of not being who I am, you know? And I think it's just difficult. I think it's really difficult to really just honor your heart. And I think as we get older, I think people get really good at not honoring their heart. And that's the most important part about that. And then what have I gained from learning about this in this space? Yeah, use more tape, bring more tape.
Love that. So we have a couple questions in the chat as well. Patrick has asked, can you talk about your color?
Yeah, I'm coffee brown with a hint of cream. I'm just playing. It's a good one. Come on, y'all. We can laugh. We can got jokes. The use of color in here. Yeah. So, I've kind of been thinking about like, well, the room. I mean, there's a lot going on here. There's a community that I pray with in Texas, and you know, the flags I'm referencing. You know, the colors are a direct pull from a lot of our ceremonies, and it's interesting to be talking about them in this space because I'm not with them, and my heart hurts, and I think I kind of feel lost without their guidance and closeness. But I'm pulling from that experiencing nonetheless. So prayer flags, if you will. But then also, you know, I think that there's like, I think Alyssa said it great the other day. She's like, your work is a little corny, which I think is like a great describer for the work. Cause I think there's an element of like used car salesman going on here where it's like, step right up, buy this thing, you know, or whatever. And then finally, the colors are also reference to childhood, right? So these colors were the primary colors in my room growing up. And I think is true for a lot of young people of these bright, bold colors. And I think that there's a lot of symbolism and power in each one of those colors, and there's like elements are there. But it's funny because we see them in really mundane situations like car sales, you know, but then we also see them in children's spaces. We also see them in prayer. And I think that the relationship of them, I think that there's a lot of esoteric meaning in them that is above my head.
Thank you. And there's one more two-part question. I'm sorry that you only have about 2 minutes for it, but Lauren has asked, do you see the gallery as the final resting place for this piece? How do you see the documentation of this piece changing as the piece continues to make different forms?
Yeah, okay, great question. Well, it's going to the Plains Art Museum for a show in September. It's a group show. Grupo del Corazon, Sopa de Corazon, and I need to get that down. But yeah, so it'll be in the gallery spaces. Like, I think that it's a lot bigger. It's going to be like, I think that there's like 6 of us or 7 of us in the show. Huge space. So I kind of was like making for that. A final iteration of this, I'm not sure. It would be awesome if there was like a map that I could just remember and put this together, like step 1, step 2. And then further iterations, like adding to it. Yeah, I definitely want to add to it. But I'm not sure. It's like, I'm not sure, but that's a great question. But yeah, Plains Art Museum. Follow me at The Real Hank Hill on Instagram, and there will be posts of that show. Thanks, Lauren.
Awesome. Thank you, Martin. Thanks for the Instagram shout out. That's a great way if folks have more questions, because now, all right, there we go. Now we're going to move on to our next artist, Alyssa Imes, and Justin's going to do a quick introduction for her.
All right. Thank you for that, Martin. All right, Alyssa grew up in Emmitsburg, Maryland, and received her undergraduate degree from Shepherd University in 2018. Through the years of her art practice, she's always been inspired by connections she makes with people, while also channeling inspiration from multiple components in her life, such as dancing to create performances that speak to personal connections and growth from trauma. Using the human body as a starting point to create unique compositions and vulnerable performances, Alyssa uses materials that range from iron to knitted textiles that often reference social interactions, communal support, and personal journey. And with that, Alyssa, take it away.
Oh, thank you, Justin. That was an amazing introduction. Thank you. I just want to say really quick that it has been an honor to show with Elizabeth and Martin, and being in the space with them, installing their work. I know during our first year show, that was something we didn't get to do. And this year we did, and it was amazing. Just being able to be with you guys in that space. And as well as thanking Brianna and Tara, thank you so much for letting us come into the space. And, you know, COVID's been really weird with knowing whether or not we were going to show. And it's amazing to have the work in a space, a clean space other than our studios. So thank you. All right, guys. Well, Tara, go ahead. You can go to the next slide. So I wanted to go ahead and just kind of walk you guys through the 3 pieces I have in the show, because I know some of you might not be able to be present within that space. So I'm going to try to give you as much best as I can for that. This piece called I Will Keep You Upright in the Cold Silence is 110 cast iron female lips from women in my community. This piece came to me with the idea of there's this really weird silence when you open up to somebody about sexual assault or even a trauma of yours. There's this lingering to say something or to like be obligated to say the right thing afterwards, or are you saying the wrong thing afterwards? And that silence it's so intense. It can really, not only the silence between the person telling the trauma compared to also the person receiving the trauma. And so I really wanted to make this piece about this silent support system, you know, just being there, being present, and being supportive of that person. So these lips are in pairs and they lean up on each other to create a stable form. It's so interesting how they also have this dialogue and this communal network. And I felt like people in my community, especially women, really affected me in a positive manner when it came to opening up about my sexual assault. And so I felt like I really wanted to reflect that silent support system, that more of that positive realm. There tends to be these ways of really diving into the negatives when it comes to negative subject matter. And there always is that balance of positive that comes with the negative. And so I've been really pushing myself to try to reference that community and that structure. And so, Terry, you can go to the next slide just to give people some more views. So this is more of on the floor. And for those of you who are near the gallery or going to the gallery, I encourage you to sit and be silent. I asked people in the gallery, and I know the docents have been asking, to be quiet around the space of these lips to create that awkward silence and kind of just embrace it and be supportive in the fact that silence sometimes can be an answer when it comes to these kinds of things. And that just structural support system is so important. And so I've always used cast iron in my practice. And I started recently calling it communal cast iron because that's really what it is to me. It's this ritual where I get together with my friends and my network of artists, and we work together to create each other's artwork. And there's something really precious about that. Like, it's such a process that takes time and effort, and getting to the end result is so complex, and having that network of people around you really is part of that important structure within my work. You can go to the next slide, Tara. Just wanted to give you guys kind of a little bit of an insight. So I really enjoyed playing around with having the raw rust on the inside of these where the connections would be made, that gritty connection, that natural connection where the outsides of the lips are more polished and sensual, and the forms turn into these like pebble kind of forms. And, having them on the floor is such this weird anomaly where when you approach them, it's so subtle. And then all of a sudden you start to realize that these are lips that are like these small little pebbles. And, there also is that place when it comes to the work about, sometimes things with sexual assault can be, kind of put down or weighed down, or there's this idea of just being silent too. And to me, I think there's also some part of that piece that reflects a little bit of that negative as well. Okay, Terry, you can go to the next slide. So this is this is the second piece in the show. And as this video just runs, guys, I just will talk about this piece. The video performance is actually a lot longer than what I'm showing you here, of course, because the video itself is almost as long as how long I can talk to you guys. So this piece is called FaceTube, Our Portal. And I just want to read to you the simple kind of sentences I have about this piece when I was really trying to reflect how to write about this piece. The space between two. To be immersed in an environment with just a single person is always the goal. Ignoring the rest of the world around you and embracing that moment. This is our portal. So this piece started off as a reflection, kind of actually an irritation to the beginning of COVID, being stripped away from my community. I've been quoted saying I'm a social butterfly. It's definitely a thing. I do not survive without people. And I always have this goal to be completely connected and engaged with a single person, having these important moments that ground you, that like it is me and this other person in this environment. So having my dance background, I really wanted to push my loom making into this wearable connection. So this is Charlotte Richardson, and she's a first year in our program, and she has a performance background as well. And we really just played around with this wearable art piece, and like being in that environment was the piece, like feeling that soft fabric. It was so calming and bright and vibrant, but then, you know, letting each other's weight, you know, be present. Like I could feel her weight in the back of my neck and my upper shoulders as she bends back. And, you know, as we pull and contract the piece, the connection can be lost as well as seen. And that to me was the really strong importance of this piece, like fighting that negative aspect of what we were dealing with during COVID. It really brought out this wearable connection that I've been trying to reach with my work. And I really enjoyed this. And I really enjoyed doing it with Charlotte as well. Okay, Terry, you can go to the next one. So lastly, I want to talk about my installation piece, post-traumatic growth. So this piece kind of came to me earlier on as this idea I had for like anyone who deals with trauma, there's this idea of this like bubbling up of dealing with the trauma. All of a sudden, like you could be cool as a cucumber and have it grounded, and then all of a sudden it like comes back up and it's intense and you don't know how to deal with it, and you got to get your ground back, and then you got to start like calming yourself back down and getting back down to your normal formulated self. And I think there's something really interesting as that happened to me recently. It was probably like 8 months ago. I realized that trauma is a landscape, you know, it's this thing that is uncontrollable. And it's so interesting how, you know, it's this unknown terrain. And so I started working with this idea. I started getting obsessed with peaks and valleys and low points, high points, waves and contractions and release and pull. And you know, it always has this balance, you know, your high points are your high points, your low points are your low points. So I started really reflecting into this idea, and I started thinking about you know, growth from trauma. Like you become this resilient being after trauma. Post-traumatic growth is like really how this piece, you know, the post-traumatic growth comes from the idea of, instead of post-traumatic stress, it's post-traumatic growth. You know, it's actually a theory I read up on, and I've been talking about it for months, and I finally found like somebody putting it into words, and it was so interesting to me because I was like, that's it. Like it's this growth after trauma, this resilience. And so you can go to the next slide, Tara. So this is just a different view. So what you're looking at here are bed sheets that I've completely deconstructed into piles and fibers, and they become these mounds in this landscape that you can walk into, and pathways are definitely at different convergent points. Like you can approach the path all the way up to the wall singularly through the center. However, like there's escape routes and ways to weave through these forms, and being surrounded by this time and this patience of ripping, shredding, breaking down these sheets into something that can no longer be built back into something. And that to me is post-traumatic growth, is like the broken down piece of yourself to the point, the lowest point, to the point where like you build yourself up in a different way and you will never get back to that original self. But the thing is that's okay. Like to embrace that deconstructive and reconstructive way is kind of where I'm at with dealing with my sexual assault trauma. Excuse me, I'm gonna take a sip of water. So, Tara, if you can go to the next slide. I don't know how we're doing on time. Hopefully we're doing, I forgot to set my timer. So when you approach the wall, you see all these like little seedlings. These, I keep calling my seedlings, but they're actually abstract forms of willow blossoms. And I thought there was something really interesting about this idea of growth from a past decayed shell. And, you know, that growth, you know, growth from past. And I'm really trying to play around with the ideas of growth in stages. As you can see here, some of these blossoms are really like growing out super far. They're in different stages of color, you know, they're also in different stages of refinement. And, you know, these are cast iron as well. And that the communal poured cast iron is so important to me as well. And I just wanted these seedlings to be cared for, polished, taken care of, and like put in a way where they can just like grow from the wall and just communicate with these mounds of deconstructive sheets. You can go to the next slide there. So, and then finally, this is like a close-up of those sheets where they're shredded to a pulp, and to the point where, you know, you can see some of the patterns in the one in the back, but they almost become like this fluffy, fun, comfy form. And it to me is so interesting how they become these like soft peaks and valleys. Like they'll never have that crazy edginess and that weight of the actual trauma, but it's interesting how the time and the presence it takes to deconstruct them has that presence. And finally, on the right is kind of, you can see a little more of those formations. I had put them, the little seedlings, in these ways where they were kind of like moving up the wall and growing in a form where almost like they were going to take off. And I feel like that's where I'm at with dealing with my trauma, is this like lift. I'm feeling a lift. I'm feeling this growth. And I know that eventually there's these peaks and valleys, and I will go back down, and I will have to remind myself that like growth comes in stages. And so sometimes you have to start back as like a little seedling and put yourself in the dirt again, take care of yourself, and then grow back up to that full blossom again. Okay, I think I'm good. So questions?
Thank you, Alyssa. And everyone, you're welcome to raise your hand or unmute if you would like to ask Alyssa your question, or you can drop one in the chat and I will read it out loud to get things started. Alyssa, I'm really drawn. I didn't realize this or didn't think of this until you were talking about your first piece and asking viewers to view in silence and kind of like hold that silent vigil with the piece. And with your background as a performance artist, do you see yourself that like your request, are you engaging the viewers in a performance with that piece? Have you had any thoughts about that?
Actually, I really did, you know, if it wasn't COVID, I really would have done this piece in a different manner, where I would definitely have invited people to like sit and like, I know Martin and I were sitting in the gallery just like talking and stories around these lips. And that was such a beautiful moment. I think if it were to be something, it definitely would be, I want to create like a safe space where people could like sit around this community and just be open about like any of their traumas and be that support for that somebody. And maybe just sitting there also in silence next to that person can also be something as well. But I know that like it's so funny. I think if I were to show this again, which I definitely want, I would love for people to like, maybe after COVID, I would love for people who want to be part of this. I keep calling it my silent army, like to be part of that army of that support is to like mold their lips in the gallery during an opening and like know that like your lips will become part of the reiterations of the piece for sure. I mean, that would be goals, but COVID, damn COVID. Oh, whoops. See, now I'm cussing Martin.
Thank you. Oh, I love to hear that. I think hopefully we'll get to a place where you can do that. Yeah. So I received a question in the chat. Can you talk about catharsis as artistic modality?
Catharsis as, oh yes. I think they're definitely, and I hope I'm answering your question correctly because vocabulary and me get along decently, but sometimes not completely. But I think there is something to be said about busy work in my work where I really want time with my pieces. It's almost like I don't torture myself, but for some reason I feel like the more important the subject matter, the more harder I want it to be to get to that final stage of the piece. And I don't know if it's like a self-destructive manner of mine, but I think there's something to be said about time and the work. And, there is something numbing about this busy work. The busy work is numbing. And I think sometimes that is how people deal with trauma. And I think there's something to be said about that. Like maybe by ripping up these bed sheets, am I really present thinking about that subject matter, or is it something busy? And I think there's a time and place for both. I think one would be extremely depressed and sad if we constantly thought about our trauma. And I think it's natural to find ways to be busy. And I mean, we also just do that in our daily lives as well. Busy, 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 so we can get through the crazy day, onto the next thing. But it is very important to be present and acknowledge your feelings as well, for sure. Hopefully I answered that correctly.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, I'll give a moment if there's anyone else who wants to unmute and ask Alyssa a question, or again, you can put it in the chat. All right.
On a
Well,
side
wonderful.
note, definitely go see Martin's piece and get under it, because that's a very interesting experience. And if you can, please see Elizabeth during her performance times. Amazing.
Wonderful.
I just more of a comment, and I typed in, I think I accidentally sent it to Tara. Yeah, dude, this is just super powerful work. Like the image, I mean, this image on the right is incredible. Seeing it in the gallery is like an experience in itself. And I think the way that you stated the subject matter subtly, but it's powerful, is like incredible. But your documentation is on point. But my comment read, really powerful work, Alyssa, taking the embodied symbols of trauma, bed sheets, and transforming them into land space for rebirth is a beautiful act and gracefully executed. So kudos, dude. This is, yeah, this is really cool stuff. I mean, powerful.
Oh, Charlotte had said something.
Yeah. Do you want me to read it for you, Alyssa?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm terrible.
So it says, I liked when you talked about community in the work, both in the weaving, fiber arts, and in the iron pouring. How do you see the relation between the two throughout your pieces?
Oh, man. So I always see like weaving in fibers definitely as this network in this, you know, fabric is made up of tiny little threads and knots and things. And so especially in the performance, you can see like the loom where it's knitted from a single strand. And that's always been throughout my work, this idea of a singular line creating this network. And I always see like yourself as a singular line, like looping and threading around these connections you make with somebody, and it creates your network, your fabric, cheesy fabric of your life. People have used that before. So I think that there's something to be said about also the strength of that network or the weakness of that network when a knot is lost. And, you know, and these sheets are also in a sense like being deconstructed into a way where they're never going to be able to be put back into sheets unless you were extremely, no, I don't think so. I was like, maybe positively, I was like, maybe no. But I think that definitely, Charlotte, that community to me is extremely important. I think my community has been, the Iron Pour community was a gift and like a godsend when I came into college. Like this, like, you know, growing up, I kind of was bullied and awkward and weird. And I think that the Iron Pour community, and especially the art community, is so beautiful and open. And that to me is awesome. Like just being open and beautiful with each other is awesome. And so yeah, I think both of those networks are extremely important. Thank you. Thanks for the questions, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Alyssa. Do you have an Instagram?
I do. It's Alyssa I'm Studios. So do I put that in the chat? Should I put that in the chat?
If you would like, since Martin started the trend, I thought I would, and that way, that's a way for folks to reach out to you with further questions or to follow what your work is doing.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
And if anyone wants to be transparent with me as well, I'm always open ears. So
great. Thank you. And now I'm going to ask Justin to introduce our final artist tonight, Elizabeth Catt.
Right. Let's see. Elizabeth grew up in Wisconsin, Kansas, Illinois, and Nebraska. She received a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Studio Art and Art History from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, a Master of Science in Administration from Central Michigan University, and a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Elizabeth is a former nurse who served 8 years in the US Air Force, where she cared for people who deserved and desired to live as much as anyone. From this experience, she creates work to confront people's conditioned perceptions, responses, and ability to look the other way. The realization that no one is immune may impact the viewer's empathy for someone unknown. Vulnerability is a common denominator in her work as she explores the fragility of human connection and consciousness. All right, take it away.
Wow, Justin, you put that together so well. Thank you so much. I need to share mine. Hopefully that works. All right. So I'm just going to take you through the work that's in the gallery right now and my thoughts about it and what I'm trying to express. This piece is called Stuck. It is like the top of that ball of yarn is about 5 feet 8 inches from the floor, because I do want it to have a figural quality and a humanness to it. And so I didn't want it to be my height, although it is a self-portrait in a lot of ways, but I wanted to be kind of a universal human height. So that's why I made that height. And the piece is about anxiety and depression, which is something that I deal with almost every day. And in COVID, it has actually been exacerbated in a lot of ways. And I think, like what Justin said, my life experience and the way I view the world, I see a lot of other people's pain, and I see a lot of other people's vulnerabilities, and I internalize a lot of that. And I think in COVID, that has certainly been true. I, thought a lot about the people that, go into a hospital and never come out and never get to see their family again. And the healthcare workers that are head to toe in infection control gear. I know what that feels like, and I can't imagine working a 12-hour shift constantly in infection control gear. Just being isolated from each other, the people that lost jobs and had to worry about rent. I mean, all of those things, like, I feel. And so this work is about that. So when I am kind of in the depths of it, I feel very stuck, and I have a real hard time kind of doing anything. And that's the latex and the tethering and all that. Like I can hardly move. And a lot of times I'm able to get the things done that I have to get done, but nothing else gets done. I'm gonna just move to a progress shot. Oh, it doesn't want to forward. So just a minute. I'm gonna stop sharing and go back to the PowerPoint, because that might be the problem. Okay, now it should work. Yay. So these are progress shots. I thought they were important because I want you to know that there is really color under there, and some of the yarn's colorful and the paint is colorful, because there's joy, right? And I'm normally a very joyful, loving, caring person when things aren't, going south. And so how I started it was this yarn that has a little bit of plastic liquid in it, so it absolutely holds its shape. And then I poured latex paint over it, let that drip down and into it. But first I started with really vibrant colors. And then I started coating it, which you can see on the one all the way on the right. I started then taking grays and dark grays and then black and putting that over it, because I think as you're descending, or depression is starting to descend on you, your light and your color and your joy starts to just get coated and put under a barrel. So then this is now what the pool looks like. So you can still see kind of color coming through. You can see kind of some subtleties of gray. The yarn is actually embedded at the bottom in the latex, so it can't raise up. And there is, I did coat some latex paint over a mask, which you can see in the upper left-hand corner, mostly just to really tie it to COVID. COVID's really exacerbated some of that for me. And so I did want to relate it to that. And I think a lot of people during this pandemic have struggled with mental health issues. Either they never had them and this brought up things that made them feel bad, made them feel depressed, made them feel anxious, made things really hard to cope with. A lot of people are suffering with grief. And so COVID for all of us has done this. And what's interesting is a lot of people, as we're starting to come out of this and they're vaccinated and maybe they can get out again, a lot of people are suffering from anxiety from being out in the world again. So this is just kind of a commonality. And then this is just another installation shot of the piece. And I think I had somebody who I was talking to about it describe it as it almost looks like a person's self has just left and just become this pool on the bottom. And when they were talking about that, it just made me sad, because that's kind of like truth, like the figure has just kind of collapsed on itself. And so that is stuck. And I like how it is in space. It is in a very dark part of the gallery and a very isolated part of the gallery. And I was, happy to be able to have that space. I meant to say, what I wanted to say at the beginning, and I forgot because I just got right into it, is installing and showing with Alyssa and Martin has been a joy since first year. Our work just has so much things that kind of work together. Now we all talk about different themes, but there's something about the work that just, there's a rhythm to the gallery and the installation. So if there's a way that you're able to go, I think that you would enjoy seeing it in person. All right, then this is the other piece that I've been working on. I started this piece on October 31st, and this is also very COVID centered. So I wanted to be able to enumerate how many people that we've lost in the United States, because the number is ridiculous. And it is so hard for humans to visualize that mass. And I went through a lot of iterations. Like I thought, well, I'll do crystals, I'll do this, I'll do that. And a lot of things, just when I added up how many I needed to buy, and that was at that time, which was like, I think under 200,000 people, I just couldn't afford it. Like, I just couldn't afford the number of things that I would need to buy and the bulk that I would need to buy. And then trying to access those kinds of supplies in a time when we can't shop was also a big challenge. So I'm kind of glad that that happened, because I like how this idea turned out. And I call this an accounting because I'm trying to account for all the people that we've lost. It is done on adding machine tape, obviously, because that's a way that we add and numerate things, and then just marks on a paper using hash marks. But what is important to me is that each person has their own mark. This is just some of the data behind it, because there is data. I am obviously a sciencey person too, and I'm very data oriented, but I think for this piece, for me, it was important. So the iteration in Stamp Gallery right now is called Through December, because my intention is to make the last mark of December 31st on May 15th when the gallery show closes. So I want to have all the marks through December 2020 done. And that would be, you can see here, 377,883 people. The current tally as of today, I'm at just a little under 252,000 people. The project is going to go on beyond December. And so really, in reality, I'm not even halfway done when you think about how many people that we have lost. I did do prior sessions, and I tried to do that in ways that were meaningful to me, either in time or in theme. And so the first one was, and so it begins, just marking the first, like all of March and into April for that first session. And then my longest day I did was a day of reckoning. And I started at the time that polls opened on the East Coast on November 3rd until they closed on the West Coast on November 3rd, so Election Day. And I called that a day of reckoning because as a nurse, I know that the pandemic has been handled really poorly, and there is no reason why all these people had to die. And so, that comes from leadership. And I felt like Election Day was going to be a reckoning for that leadership. Then I did a part called The Shift. And The Shift is a kind of a tribute to the healthcare workers that have been involved. And I did it a 12-hour day because most healthcare workers work 12 hours. I actually went 12 and a half because you have a half hour for lunch. So I did 12 and a half hours. I called it The Shift, and I tried to highlight the healthcare workers that have been really in the thick of this. Then Empty Places is Thanksgiving Day. And I worked that day is the only day that I worked from home. And I did it at our dining room table because I was really thinking about all the people who had empty places around their tables. And then one day I just did it on my own. One of the things, and you might think, well, you do it on your own, right? I've been live streaming this since the beginning because part of that is the time that it takes. The time that it takes to make all these marks and having that be visible to people. I call it the world's most boring live stream because it's very boring. But the time factor is really important to me. And I've had people join me for like 3 to 4 hours. I can see how many people are watching. And if they come on Facebook and they make a comment, I'm able to see comments and quips from there. So sometimes I'm not on my own. And also just the pressure of the cameras, it's not the same. So one day I just did it by myself, making marks, and I didn't live stream it. And then I tried to do a 24-hour time because I was exhausted with the process and it was exhausting. And I only got 13 hours in, mostly because I didn't plan my sleep very well. But that was the last time. And now I'm on through December. The other thing that I think is important, I have about 3 more minutes. So the other thing that I think is important is there was a study that came out that I've shown you here. It was Columbia University, and it came out just before I started the project because I was trying to think about how do I show how many people we didn't need to lose? And so there are colors. There's a dark blue. Dark blue is kind of the number of people that it's a virus. It's very virulent. It's very catchy, and it's deadly. There were going to be a certain number of people that we would have lost. But then the light blue is, these are the people that we didn't have to lose if we could have done it as well as Australia. The light orange is, this is how many people we didn't have to lose if we would have done it as well as Germany. And then the dark orange, which is about 50% of the marks, is how many people we wouldn't have had to lose if we would have done it as well as Canada. So you can see the colors on the bottom that they kind of all intertwine, and I just do it in order. And that's just a picture of the empty places day. I just piled all the paper into one chair as I made it. This was at the end. I didn't bring any extra paper that day. I just brought the rolls that I would need to make the marks for several hours. And this is what I had got done on Thanksgiving Day. And then this is in the gallery. I am live streaming from the gallery. The times are all listed on the stamp website. If you want to be notified of a live stream or want to watch a live stream, probably the best place to do that is facebook.com/eCatStudio, because I live streamed there and I live streamed to YouTube. So if you want to watch it live, you can do that. And I knew nothing about live streaming when I started, so I had to learn all of it. And I try to make it a little bit exciting because I know it's not very exciting. So I do have 4 cameras. They randomly switch, so you can kind of see different views. But that's about as exciting as it gets. I mean, I don't want it to be exciting. It's a very dour subject, but you know, it gets tiring to watch, I think. And then up here on the right, that's kind of my setup on my table. You know, I have my numbers that I'm keeping track of. I have all the different color markers. And then people ask me if I can think. I can't think about anything but the numbers, because when you can tell I'll start recounting, and it's because my mind started wandering into a different topic and I have to recount. I just count, it's in groups of 50. And so every 50, I move a marker so that I can keep track. So that's how I do it. And then just the last image is kind of, that was the pile, I think last Thursday. There's probably 4 or 5 more tapes on it now. So that is my time. So should I stop sharing? And I'll wait and see if somebody wants me to talk about something on the slides.
Yes, thank you so much, Elizabeth. And so folks, if you have questions, you can raise your hand or unmute to ask them. There's a few in the chat. So while folks are collecting their thoughts, I'll read the first one. The piece stuck reminds me of Giacometti's paintings. Any connection to him and his sense of existential dread?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I love his work so much, and that kind of sense of stretching and that. So no, not intentionally.
Great, thanks. And then Martin has asked, on your journey in translating these astronomical figures by hand into a visual representation, what things have come up for you through the process? How has your perspective and feeling shifted thus far?
I think there's an enormous weight to the piece for me. Like I feel very responsible. I feel very responsible for this paper. And I don't allow myself a lot of emotion because I'm counting, I'm not really thinking much about what I'm counting. But I'm pretty sure that when I get through December, it's going to be very emotional for me because it's kind of one stopping point. It's one waypoint. And I don't know how I'm going to care for this paper. And I do feel a certain, like, I want to preserve this. And so I think it's the weight of it. I didn't expect it to feel so weighty. I also didn't expect the numbers to get where they have gotten. But I think it's very important. And other people have asked me, why don't you have other people do it? Why don't you? I feel very compelled that it's me making the marks. And, if somebody else wanted to do it, I'd be happy if they did the process and did it themselves. But this process and these papers, it's really important to me that I'm doing it. I hope that answered your question. Okay.
Wonderful. Are there, Justin raised his hand.
Elizabeth, so outside of your piece, outside the gallery, there's going to be people standing in line to get tested, right? So they'll be looking at you. Is there going to be any sort of sign outside where they could log into Facebook while they're standing there and sort of interact with you or ask questions?
There hasn't been yet. I mean, there is a sign on the door of the gallery that has all that information, like when I'm live streaming and then the locations that you can see the live stream. So that's on the door. But I have thought about maybe a QR code just to my Facebook page so that people can snap it quick and they can see what it's about. So, and maybe I should put that up closer to where the paper is, like where they might see me versus at the door. So
one last question. Have you ever found yourself dreaming of counting?
No, I haven't. I mean, that's surprising, right? You think I could count to 50 like in my head, but I don't.
I figured with your past experience and how much you take that home personally each day.
I know.
That you may have like dreamt about patients or your job. And I figure like maybe this would, come into your subconscious a little bit more.
You'd think, because I really do have times, I mean, I still dream about patient care. And now it's like, I don't know what I'm doing and I never know how to run the IV pumps. And so it's really frightening, but it's something that still happens. But so far, no, I haven't dreamt about this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any final questions? I see someone to mute. Okay, perhaps not.
Tara,
Good.
you've
Yes.
done a great job. I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. And Elizabeth, you have your facebook.com/ECAT Studio, where folks can
I have an
find you.
Instagram too, but it's just, and it's ECAT Studio too.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks to all three artists who presented tonight. Thank you, Justin, for your excellent work with these artists and for working with me every year to bring these exhibitions. We're always thrilled to have them. I also want to thank our gallery docent, Kayla, who's been on here running all of the tech and admitting everyone in the waiting room. Thank you, Kayla. And who has also, I think, worked with all of the artists during their install. I put in the chat, you can get Elizabeth's live stream dates and also links, as well as other information about the exhibition, stamped.umd.edu/gallery. We also have private reservations. The first hour of every day is reserved for private visits. So if you would rather come into the gallery and be the only person in there, you can make a reservation, stamped.umd.edu/gallery reservation. It's on our website as well. Yes, thank you all so much for this. Have a great evening. And I'm gonna